we interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
Day one, basic training, getting on the cattle cart, Fort Sill, Oklahoma, was the biggest shock up until this very moment in my life that I've ever received. The drill sergeants were swarming on us like sharks on chum. And when the cattle cart got to, I want to say, 1st to the 33rd Field Artillery, Fort Sill, our barracks, about 6 more drill sergeants descended on the cattle cart, and they were screaming at us. And once we got off, they had us fall in, and then it was half left face, push-ups, and insults. And first thought I had in my mind was like, why did I do this?
Yeah.
Why did I do this?
Yeah.
But now I look back on it fondly. I mean, I really do. I mean, from that day till the end of basic and then the end of AIT as being in Field Artillery, 1 station unit training in Fort Sill,
Yeah,
was super helpful in the whole idea of teamwork. You're only as good as your weakest link. And I think it prepared me to go to my permanent duty station in Germany. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of gratitude and fondness for basic training in AIT. Anytime I see military movies too, I see like it being portrayed in like on TV or film, like it warms my heart because it brings me right back.
Yeah, I tell people, and I've done it for, I don't know, like probably 2 or 3 decades now. Anytime I don't care what age they are, like when people will show any interest in the military, I do everything I can to start explaining, like, hey, this is my experience. Everyone's got a different one, but greatest decision I ever made. 17 years old, signed the dotted line, and right after I graduated, same thing. Shipped out to Fort Benning, and I did 4 years. But man, it changed my world perspective. But also that whole idea of where I grew up. I was in a large city in the South, but there was just not a whole lot going on in that sense. And I loved punk. I loved hardcore. Like I loved going to shows. And then joining, some people were like, "Are you crazy?" Like one guy basically told me I was now part of this machine that was destroying humanity and stuff. And I couldn't wrap my brain around it because I had seen stuff, in the news or in magazine articles I read of like atrocities happening. And I just thought, man, I want to join and be something bigger than what I am. And I don't know, like I had always been interested in it. But like for you, when you joined, I mean, was everybody pretty supportive in that sense, or did some people kind of go, maybe not?
I want to go back to you saying it was the best decision you ever made. Today, at work, I work the Boston Fire Department as an employee assistance program counselor, peer counselor. I've worked as a firefighter and worked as a dispatcher for Boston Fire too. So I've been fortunate to wear a couple of different hats in the department. But when I joined, like the military, like, we've been kicking that around. I think most people in my family were like supportive and understood that I wanted to get money for college. And I think I really, it's kind of comical thinking back now, like the motto or the pitch from the Army was "Be all that you could be." Be all you could be. The big commercials, and so and they'd run out, and I got caught up in that patriotism, and I got caught up in that, and I wanted to, serve this country, and I still believe in the idea of America. I believe in it being a place for all beings and a place where we can all kindly agree to disagree and then compromise and work things out. And and try to take care of everyone and pay it all forward and be good to each other. You know, it's a tall order, right? I mean, it's a high bar.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
again, like my family was supportive. Yeah, but there were kids, like people that liked the same type of music I did, whether it was punk rock or at the time, you know, it was we were calling it alternative or postmodern. So I like I like the Smiths. I like Echo and the Bunnymen. I like the psychedelic verse as much as I like the Clash, Stiff Little Fingers, Sham 69, The Business.
Yeah.
You know, Agnostic Front, Slapshot, Jerry's Kids, Gangrene.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people that who are into, you know, the music, those types of music that I know were like, I got some of the same like pushback from them. Like, how could you join something so vicious and some big bad empire? When my way of thinking was, you know, I think of like Normandy Beach in the Second World War. And,
yeah.
I mean, you know, you can call the military what you want, but if you want to like get some context of the past and how this country is comparative to other nations free, and you know, people serve to ensure that right and still do. So I know a lot of people have divergent views on it and different views, but I still believe in defense of this nation. I still believe in the idea of America, and I feel like giving all folks a voice and a seat at the table is good too. And to get back to your question though, I got some pushback. Like I definitely got what the fucks, and some people like turn their back on me, but that didn't deter me or bum me out, or I just, you know, I said, well, that's how they feel. This is how I feel, and I'm gonna move forward with this. And I don't regret the decision at all. I look back on it fondly, and I know it's one of the few good decisions I've made in my life.
Well, that's the funny thing is like people go, yeah, Brian there, he's always harping on the Army, you know, so long ago, but for me, it set that path up. And more than anything, I think, like, my thing was, it was like the most, I don't know, hardcore in my mind thing I could do. And when I joined, I met a few other people that were in the punk and hardcore scene. And then we all shared the same thing. Like I had a dude, I was in Delta Company at the time at my unit, and this guy was in Bravo Company, and I'm blasting at that time, I think it was like Snapcase. And this dude comes down the hall, and he was from Buffalo, and he just starts going crazy. And the next thing you know, we're breaking out like at that time what was very small bands. I mean, they were putting out like little 7-inches and stuff. And then of course that scene or whatever blew up later. But it was one of this the idea of just the Army. I was exposed to so many different people too from other countries, and that was the cool thing too. There were people who had joined the Army who were working to get their citizenship. And so like one of my buddies from Vietnam, and that's how he got his citizenship while he was in the U.S. Army. And that dude was like, that was like the proudest day of his life. He was 8 years old when he came to America. So he remembers what life was like before, and then how he had to learn English. And I tell stories about him a lot, but that was an inspiration to me. You know, I was just some kid from the South, like, I joined the Army, but this dude was from another country, learned another language, and adapted well to the Army. And for years we talked about it, and he's living a great life. But so I will say, before we get too far into the conversation, this is for the listeners out there. They know I always push a lot of music. I've talked about Street Dogs in past episodes and told people, hey, check out this band, check out these songs, or even have quoted some of the songs. And we'll get into some of the influence Street Dogs have had on some people doing some pretty big work in the country right now. But for the listeners, the voice you hear is Mike McColgan. He is the former lead singer of Street Dogs. I say former, but looks like y'all are playing some shows, which we can talk about. But yeah. So if I say that, then, you know, just verbally smack me. But So Street Dogs in his background. You heard him talking about the Army, former soldier in the Army, original lead singer, Dropkick Murphys. I've talked about the Do or Die album, Dropkick Murphys, that you sang on. That one blasted in the barracks quite a bit too. Yeah, and Boston Firefighter as well. So when I started this show a while back, that was one of the things that I really wanted to do was find guests who came from different backgrounds and who did things that were different than the norm or the categories that were sometimes put in society. And so you were on the list, the first list I made, and it's taken a while, but it was like this dude right here hits all these brackets of what to me is kind of a testament to people who go their own route in life and then can transition from firefighter to artist to musician to and we'll get into the power of shows and music and people's perspectives changing. But I just wanted to let the audience know that voice they hear and when we get into a little bit more of this stuff. So moving forward, you went to the Army, you did a couple of years in the Army. And then when you get back, like what's life like for you transitioning back? I mean, back to kind of to society and being just what we would call like a civilian or a normal person.
So when I got back to the world after I ETS'd out of Fort Dix, fortunately I had a good job at a newspaper in Boston Globe, waiting for me in the press room. And I'm got to say I'm extremely grateful to my uncle Ernie, my cousin Brian, my cousin Jeff, and my cousin EJ's because they really helped pave the way for that. So I just got to give them a shout out. But I was really mired with a pretty serious drinking problem, and in that drinking, if I was out and about partying or whatever, if there were other, dry goods around, I was not going to say no to that either. So, yeah, the transition was booze and drug addled. And I came into Alcoholics Anonymous a couple times when I was 21, and then July 30th, 1992, I went to AA, and I've been sober from booze and drugs ever since. So, and then that I mean, incrementally, a day at a time, like doing that program, things have gotten better in my life. My life hasn't been perfect. I've made a lot of mistakes, just like everybody else. But I feel like the transition at first was rocky, very rocky. And drinking and other substances were what I was using to try to cope with that. They were maladaptive coping mechanisms, not skillful. And fortunately, I found myself in Alcoholics Anonymous. My father played a big part in that too. He passed away sober Christmas Eve, 2011, and he'd been sober for years, and he was a big help in me getting into the rooms and going to AA.
Yeah, I can't tell enough stories about how I saw guys transitioning out of the Army and battling the same thing. And I don't know that people always understand that. I still talk to this buddy of mine to this day, and he has battled it from the time he was in until he got out. And there was that culture that I kind of battled it head on when I was in, but I hated it, where it was drink. But I would watch brand new soldiers come in as I moved up through the ranks. I'd watch brand new soldiers come in, and they've never even had a drink or a sip. And then they just start going, full bore. that always bothered me. And I think that the Army tried its best, at least locally at the base I was at, to try to change some of that culture of it or whatever. But it's tough, and then to battle that when you get out. So hats off to you. I've got family members that have battled alcoholism, and when you said about your father passing away sober, I had an uncle that he had finally kind of done it, hit rock bottom, and he sobered up. And he lived homeless for about 20 years in the same city that I worked. So I would have different interactions with him. But it was just one of those things that when he passed away, he was sober. And the whole family, that was what everybody always wanted. So, I mean, I say hats off, man. That's to me too.
Hats off to him too.
Yeah. I think that if everybody would just support one another, and when someone says, and this could be different for you, but I've watched people when they say, yeah, hey, I'm good. I don't want a beer tonight, or I don't want to drink tonight. It's like adult peer pressure, like, oh, come on, you quit drinking. It's kind of like, I don't know. I just want everybody to be like, if someone says they don't want to drink, they probably got their own reasons for that. Like, hey, like, let them go. It's not an after school special. We don't have to put pressure on people for it,
No, I agree with you 100%. And I can remember when I first got sober, telling people in my family or friends, and you talk about adult peer pressure, that was there. And I think some people, when you say that you're charting a new course and you want to put the plug in the jug and you want to stop drinking and using dry goods, some people, I think, feel uncomfortable, and I feel like they instantly feel like you're judging them, that they should be doing the same thing, when in all actuality you're really not at all. It's not even in your brain housing group, those thoughts. But people can go on defense real easy, and I mean, everybody's going to have different feelings about it, but that's just been my direct experience in the past with it. But also, I feel like today in 2024, like compared to back then in the early 90s, I feel like the younger generations, they have a more progressive and open-minded view of addiction. And I think people are more willing to seek help, and there's less stigma now with addiction. Yeah. Be it substance abuse, use disorder, alcohol or drugs, or even process addictions, with gambling, shopping, sex and love, technology. The list is long, because I don't think that addiction is like something that's like linear or is capped. It's something that, sadly, the categories for it grow. And I feel like in this day and age, there's more treatment, more modalities, more therapeutic means, more IUPs, inpatient places. There's more resources available for people.
Yeah, definitely that push across the board. We saw it in the police world, yoga, intermittent fasting. Like my experience, my department, I always had a department psychologist. I could pick up the phone, say, hey, I need to talk. We just worked a homicide, fill in the blank of the horrors. And that was one of the things that I always had access, but not a lot of departments knew that for many, many years. I think now so many of them, even if they can't afford to have their own in-house psychologists, that they actually pay for their officers to go and seek help like that, and to understand there's stuff that people see, and this in any first responders, there's things that they see that it may not affect them early in their career, but eventually it can, or the other stressors of life, or even alcohol, substance abuse, sometimes even just lack of exercise, just crazy shift work. I do kind of see some departments changing in that, and I hope that's across the board, not just something we're seeing in the South when I'm training and stuff. Is that shift at least, you know? So for you, when like when you got into the whole music thing, like you had mentioned some of the bands that influenced you earlier. How did it basically just come about that you're like, look, I'm gonna be one of the greatest frontmen of bands that anyone's ever heard, which is legit, but go ahead.
I can't look at it that way.
I know I'm messing
Like,
with you, but it's true, dude.
right. I mean, you can talk to anybody who's ever known me. My ego is not my amigo.
I know.
I mean,
Yeah.
It's definitely hasn't served me or anybody else, for that matter. And I think about 4.5 years ago, I got involved with another recovery pathway, refuge recovery. I got involved in a dedicated Dharma and Buddhist practice, meditating, going to retreats, learning about Buddhism. And it was there that I realized that, like, how my ego's not my amigo, and that, like, when I think in terms of I, me, mine, it's kind of limiting. And I'm not trying to be esoteric or, act like I'm the Dalai Lama or act like I'm an authority on Buddhism or Dharma by any stretch of the imagination. But I seem like when, Street Dogs, for example, the band winds down in about 2020. We were scheduled to do some farewell shows in March of 2020. We were going to support Flogging Molly on the West Coast. That was going to be it, but COVID just shut all that down. So when the band ended, we were all burnt out. Mm-hmm. And the rigors of doing that for what? You're talking 17 years being in a band. It wore us all out. And myself personally, I found my addiction had manifested another way with a sex and love process addiction. And, I'd acted unskillful and promiscuous. So I went over to refuge recovery thinking, I think they're probably just going to boot me out the door. But mm-hmm. They were very receptive, very kind, and they taught me 4 noble truths, an 8-fold path, and how to live with ethical integrity again and live clean in all my affairs, and how to make amends to people, direct face-to-face amends when it's skillful or appropriate or possible, and then living amends too by, living skillfully and doing the good in front of you. Mm-hmm. And I realized that refuge recovery and Buddha Dharma, Buddhism more specifically, sort of fleshed out or informed me more and reflected more on the promise that AA had talked about, it being an inside job. Dharma and Buddhism showed me how. And Dharma and Buddhism and refuge recovery stopped me from reaching out, to try to look for validation or instant gratification externally, when it's all an inside job. Like our wellness, mm-hmm. our health is an inside job. And, I'm not here to beat the drum for Dharma or meditation or prayer or Jesus or anything like that. But if I'm speaking about my own direct experience in life, I found coming back to prayer and realizing the benefits of meditation and mm-hmm. the higher power that I grew up with and Buddhism can work symbiotically, interconnectively, and it's helped me out so much. It really has. And
yeah,
you talked about wellness, got touched on briefly, so I think I kind of circled into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It's amazing to what seems very simple when I look at things now, and that's kind of one of the things, or the ongoing theme when I'm training officers and agents and stuff. It's like you got to be ego free. When you're doing gang work and when you're doing homicide investigation stuff, like you got to be ego free, and you got to be ego free even if you're a patrol officer. And this applies to life in general. Like, I think we're very good in our society at being able to build our identities around things. And sadly, sometimes, or not even sometimes, we're definitely seeing it now, kind of the fallout of when people do build this identity based on either consumerism or just what they think they are about, and then they project it to the world instead of just, hey, what is it that makes you happy? How can you live a clean life, meaning like you're not taking in things that are self-destructive, or like you said, looking for external validation, when if you're chasing that, then people can begin to manipulate you, or even just people can get into a very negative state of mind. I don't want to get so heavy on that, but it is amazing now that I can sit down and talk to adults in certain fields, and they understand what I'm talking about. Whereas 15 years ago, when I was saying things like this, new in my career, people looked at me like I was crazy, and they thought I was this, as they would call me, like this touchy-feely guy. And I'm like, no, I'm talking to another human being about life and about the horrible decisions they've made. And that's what I'm trying to do. I have the capabilities to fight. I have the capabilities to commit great violence on another human being. I don't want that. And the situation may even dictate that that's what's necessary. But I believe that through my skills in communication, I may actually be able to avoid violence of any kind. And so it's taken a while for some people to even fully get it. And it's crazy, but I think at the core of it is that ego, is that whatever we start to build our own personas on, or whatever, that we project out, and then we have to defend it so I don't know, harshly, that even street fights are half the times over crazy stuff like that, like one guy thinking he's getting disrespected, by someone else. I don't know. I am glad to hear, though, that a lot of changes have happened like that. And when I ask you questions about the bands and stuff like that, to me, I've always tried to express the bands, how much it means to me. Since, I was like 10 years old when I first got into punk rock, and prior to that it was heavy metal, but that didn't sit with me the way listening to Minor Threat did for the first time, so it's one of those things that every time a band plays down south and I go see a show, I always try to go out of my way to say thank you to the bands. I always say, like, hey, it means a lot. I know sometimes playing shows down in the south may be tough to book shows or whatever, but I always try to go out of my way, to thank the bands. And one of the things that you used to do a lot, whenever I would catch street dog shows, is doing that, is actually talking to the crowd and thanking the crowd. And I always felt like you guys really did enjoy what you were doing, and that it meant something. Obviously the songs mean something, but also that experience of getting into a club, or I even saw y'all at the Warped Tour in North Carolina at one point in Charlotte. And here we are at the Warped Tour, all these bands playing, and you guys get to take the stage, and all these other people get to experience it that probably wouldn't have. And I'm sure that was the kind of the cool thing about that tour, is just like so many different bands and groups of listeners, coming together.
Yeah, it's so important to thank the people that take time, money to come see you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think of Joe Strummer from The Clash. Without people, you're nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, in my opinion, or my view, or my direct experience around this is, when we're not having a show if nobody's there.
Mm-hmm.
And whether there's 4 people, 400 or 4,000, or even more, we're going to go full blast every time and give 100% of what we have. And, you know, life gets lifey, and there's usually a lot going on in you know, all of the band members' lives when they're on the road. It's like life doesn't stop just because you're in this bubble,
Mm-hmm.
in America or Europe or wherever you are.
Yeah.
So usually what has to happen before you walk up those stairs to play the show is you got to kind of put that stuff on hold, and you got to kind of refocus and retool and be mindful of what you have to do.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to kind of make these songs universal, and you have to connect with the people you're playing for. And then, you know, at the end of the show, talk to people, sign posters or shirts, just be kind. And like you said, like really skillfully, is thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank everybody that you interface with, because they're the reason why you get to do it.
Yeah. One of the crazy things, so anytime I'm connecting with people throughout the U.S., we start talking about music and things like that. I had a guest on a while back, Matt Browning. So this guy went undercover. He was a detective out in Arizona. He goes undercover because he starts to see a presence of Nazi skinheads. This is several years ago, probably late 90s, early 2000s. But he starts to see a presence of Nazi skinheads in that area, and he starts to kind of see the violence that's occurring. So he goes under and starts to infiltrate certain sections of local skinhead crews, Nazi skinhead crews there. He goes under with a Klan clavern in that area. So he ends up doing this for, I think it's like 10 years, 12 years. Wrote a book, The Hate Next Door. But that guy, he and I text quite a bit now. He teaches different techniques, and I won't get into all that because that's for his classes and courses. But when he ends his classes and when he's giving presentations, he plays Street Dogs, Not Without a Purpose, Not Without a Fight. And he's always telling people, like, hey, like, life is good and it's worth fighting for. And some of us are going to have to go in harm's way, but we've got to do this in order to address things like this, how this it basically is a cancer that grows. And so it's like one of those things that I don't know what it's like to be a musician, or what it's like to put a song out there and then know that it helps motivate someone to go do a line of work that is like counterintuitive to our own safety, you know. And he tells stories about having guns pulled on him and his life being threatened, but he kept doing it because it was work that needed to be done. And I always tell people, man, it's like the punk rock and the music scene, it's all cyclical, and it's motivating people to do great things. If I remember right, the Descendants drummer had a brain tumor or had an issue with his brain, and the surgeon who saved his life actually grew up listening to the Descendants.
Yeah,
I mean, things. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. We did a record up at the Blasting Room in Fort Collins, a self-titled record, and Bill Stevenson, the Descendants drummer, was, you know, just still kind of recovering from that surgery, and near the end he came in. So Jason Livermore, who Bill works with, you know, that's Bill's engineer up there in the Blasting Room. We worked with him because Bill was still, like, you know, in recovery and in rehab from the surgery. But Bill told us that story when he did come in near the end. Actually, Milo came by too, and we were all like, we didn't even know what to do because we're all such huge, like, you know, fanboys around him.
Yeah.
Particularly me. And yeah, it was cool to hear that the surgeon that, saved
Yeah.
Bill Stevenson's life, one of the greatest drummers in punk rock history, if not the best.
Yeah,
Was a fan of the band, had all their records,
Yeah. And probably when he was a kid was told, don't listen to that music, not even knowing, that there wasn't anything bad about it. But it's true, like so much of that growing up, I tell stories now, and it's like, I don't know, it kind of blows my mind how some of the parents dealt with kids in the 80s and 90s, that were into like punk rock and stuff. And like one friend of ours, my brother and I had a friend burned, like he took that kid's dad took all the stuff, his records, his shirts, put them in the yard and just set them on fire. And like told him, like, you will not be listening to this music anymore. And I mean, it wasn't even anything crazy. I mean, especially looking back now, I don't know. I always, it blows my mind how parents can get it so wrong when it comes to music and kids, and just how to kind of guide them like that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. It makes me think of, I had a bunch of posters up in my room. It almost looked like this place on Winter Street in downtown Boston, this place called Stairway to Heaven. I had like glow-in-the-dark posters of the Police. I had the Clash up there, U2 Under a Blood Red Sky, Bob Marley, like all sorts of stuff in my room.
Mm-hmm.
My mother sees Bob Marley, and in her way thinking, Bob Marley means smoking marijuana.
Yeah.
So all the other posters in my room suffered the wrath of that limited view, that wrong view. And she tore that poster down, and then, went on some rant about, not smoking marijuana. It'll make you a dope, and say no.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah,
I remember, like, I was born in that. I'm like 54 years old. I was, in the 70s and 80s, particularly the 80s. It was just like, say no to drugs.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember listening to like Coup d'etat by the Circle Jerks, and then hearing, the Secret Service knocked on his door and was like, "Hey, what's this song about?"
Yeah.
It's about taking out our president, perhaps.
Yeah, I didn't know that. Yeah,
we were still like in the 80s. There was still like a lot of that like conservative overreach, and I remember the PMRC, and then all that nonsense. And so, like, the good thing about punk rock or hardcore metal, when I grew up, it was like we were all looking for connection in a place to go. And when we had those shows, we had that music like on a Friday night, like we had a place to go. Like it made you feel like you belonged. Like you had a place that you could, like, you had an alternative world that was outside the golden rule of school, the guidance counselor's office. And you just felt like you had an escape hatch, and that music felt like that. It felt like this is a thing, like a community that we can all like land in and take care of one another. And back then our parents really didn't see it that way. I think there's been a lot of movement forward with that, I would think, now comparative to back then.
Yeah, I think the drug and alcohol use, I think, like, parents, just ask your kids, have a serious heart-to-heart conversation, why they start to get into it. If you think they're getting into it, or they're getting into it, it's like, maybe not drop the hammer necessarily. Find out if there's another reason they're doing that. But when you talk about going to shows in that community, were you going to shows before you joined the Army? Like, did you grow up going to some shows or not?
Like, I remember going to like shows to see some metal bands. I remember seeing this band, The Alarm. They were from Wales. They were sort of like a punkish rock um, type of band.
Uh-huh.
I think they were kind of like really influenced by like that early like punkish U2, like the first three albums by
Yeah.
U2,
Okay.
like that. You could feel the influence of Stiff Little Fingers hanging over them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, both bands being from Ireland, and
Yeah.
going to shows like that, going to see U2. I remember going to the channel to see some bands, um, some of the hardcore bands, like and it was the smaller shows the sweatier shows that were um, more communal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, seeing bands in like theaters or like stadiums is great, but nothing beats like being in a like a 300 to 500 600 capacity room and everybody's just living and dying by it. Nothing beats that. I mean, I've been fortunate to be on both sides of shows, like on stage and off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still a fan of music, and I've actually gone. I think over the last couple of years, I've gone to a lot more shows than I did prior to COVID because I became a fan of music again. I think being in a band made me get real judgmental of other artists and stuff, and kind of handicap their operation.
Mm-hmm.
When I'd be watching them, and now I don't do that anymore. I'm kind of more open-minded and grateful to be alive and just be able to listen to music and be able to go to a show. It's try to live my life in the present moment and have a lot more gratitude. Like memento mori, like death is our birthright, and we're all walking each other home to that final resting place, and we're all partners in birth and death, and music is such a unifying thing.
Mm-hmm.
It really is. I in my own direct experience, I haven't seen too many things be as unifying as music. I've seen music unify people from divergent philosophical views or political views that you would never think possible. I can think of times when I remember, like, I'll give an example on a Street Dog song. We had a song on State of Grace album, Free, that some of us were ambivalent about, some of us felt more strongly about. Me being one of the people that felt more strongly about the song. So it was a little stretch for us, a little different territory.
Mm-hmm.
But I felt like the hook and the strength of the song and the lyrics propelled the song. And then that if I pushed the vocal take and leaned into it, I felt like it would resonate. So I remember like playing that song, and then we would have all walks of life in the pit singing the song together that you would never typically see together. And it's just, I mean, I'm like grateful to have been able to see that. And then I kind of intuitively knew that the song had that. I can feel that intuitively, but people had different feelings, and that's valid too. Like their feelings were valid too, and they had a leap of faith and signed on to the tune, and it made the record. And I feel like that's become one of our biggest songs.
Yeah, anything that and I, so you're aware, like I have never met anyone who listens to Street Dogs who hasn't seen y'all live and then not said a lot of the same things that like myself and my brother talk about. Because my brother and I used to go every time you guys would play, we'd hit the shows together because he got me into punk and we grew up, together, and we're still close. But it is one of those things that I would probably say you guys probably nailed it the best to me in that sense of people looking to the left and the right in the pit, and almost kind of like being like, all right, I'm gonna let this pass or let that pass. Everybody's here and not quite as judgmental, or at least not as tense. You know how it is. It shows
Yeah.
like dude, I went to it's probably one of the Slapshot / shows down south a couple years ago. A dude got thrown through their merch table. You know what I mean? Like there were fights going on, and it wasn't anything to do with them. It was just like that. People came there sometimes, whatever, angry. I don't know. I do think there's an ebb and flow to the crowd, and that was one of the things that I love about your shows is just that, like where it's almost like watching a really great, I don't know, presentation when someone just captures your attention and then you ride it, and even, and also, man, seeing like 13, 14, 15-year-olds at the shows, and it's the exact same feeling. You see it in their face. It's the exact same feeling we all had when we were kids. You know what I mean? And I just, I don't know that a whole lot of that is left necessarily. Like a lot of people are losing it generation to generation, sadly, because sometimes we're staring at our phones all day. But it's like this idea of getting back together, getting in a pit, or even just being in a crowd and a band playing their heart out and songs that matter. And then when some kid reads the liner notes, or an adult, but I mean, you know how it is, like adults, we know things are important, but like as kids, when they read a song and go, I didn't know this song was about this or that, it unlocks something. And I'm glad that there are still shows, there are still bands playing. And, I'm glad you all are playing some shows here pretty soon.
Yeah. I mean, I still believe, it makes me think of the Frank Turner song, I believe, that that there's still punk bands out there that are going to emerge. I think there'll be hardcore bands that are going to emerge. I think things are constantly changing, and every time period has its own variance or difference because of causes and conditions and the passing of time. I really believe that those vital, desperate bands will emerge, and that the current generation and the follow-up generations, they'll have their say and they'll have their bands. And I think of a band. I was listening. There's a band I've really got turned on to, a band called High Vis.
Okay.
And they're very, very, very good. And they take sounds of street punk and oi and punk rock and Manchester, Oasis, Charlatans UK, Blur sound, and even pop, and they just weave it all together. And they're very representative of 2024, where that the punk rock vocal delivery is unmistakable and pivotal and powerful and poignant, and it's given me a lot of faith that the newer bands, them being one of them, Conservative Military Image too, another great band. So many, the Drowns, for example, out of Seattle, so good. I have a lot of faith for the future because I really feel like there's a lot of good stuff going on. And, I feel like the current generation and the following ones will have their say. And I want to circle back to Street Dogs. And one of the things that makes it so powerful on stage and off stage is that me and Johnny have very different views about things, but we've always been able to agree to disagree and come to consensus or come to compromise. And you know what I mean? Because there was a time when I got some pushback about doing songs about, military service and stuff. And I said, how could it be authentic? Or I mean, I have to talk about like my experience, strength, and hope in life and direct experience. And I think he understood that. Like Johnny's a very good conversationalist. Like, it's particularly in the creative space because he's able to open up his mind to a bunch of different lenses. He doesn't get into subjective, narrow, fixed views about music. So me and him, like, having that yin and yang, that push and pull when it came to recording music and then performing it live, there was always that creative tension, and you could feel it. And it morphed into its own energy, and it was very powerful, I think. You know, and then all the people we got to play with, all the great musicians, like Jeff Erna, you know, Rob Gazzotti, Joe Sorois, Matt Pruitt, Lenny Lashley, Pete Sosa, Gavin Caswell. I know I'm forgetting people, but I mean, we've been so fortunate to have so many great players, and now for these shows that are coming up at the Middle East on August 29th, that there's like 10 tickets left. That's going to sell out. Then we're going to play on the Pumpkin Drublick Festival. That's NoFX's, you know, farewell. I'm really, the lineup's really, really good. I know there's a lot of great bands on the show, and we're filling in for Sick of It All. Lou Kohler has, I think, esophageal cancer, and they're going to remove nodes from his throat. And everybody's rallied around him to try to help him out. And I think there's a GoFundMe page for him. And a lot of people are rallying in various different ways to help him out. And we've toured with them before in the U.S. and we played with them in Europe. So when we got asked to kind of fill in, we would never fill their shoes because no band on the face of the earth.
Look, when you mentioned that, I just flashed back. You guys toured with them, and my cousin and I and a few other guys traveled down to South Carolina and caught you guys at like a tiki bar or some like small venue, and it was Flatfoot, you guys, Sick of It All, and Matt's band Devil's Brigade. And the place went freaking crazy. Someone brought a mattress in there, and like people were like surfing on the mattress on the crowd. I was telling my buddies, like, you'll never see a show with this much energy with these bands together at like just a random area. Like, I don't know. It was incredible. And Sick of It All is, like you said, by far, like, just one of the best, growing up, like one of the best hardcore bands that still around. Every record comes out, and I'm like, gosh, it's better, like, not, I don't want to say get better and better, but it's like, yeah, it's just they do tight and powerful and singing about things that still matter. And I don't know. I try my best to put people on them. And I do think they're almost like a Motorhead, where they can swim between metal and punk and hardcore. And like everybody kind of goes, you know, okay, Sick of It All, but then also they're leaning a lot harder on metal. And then they're like, yeah, you're right, that Sick of It All album is,
and then they can even, like, the thing that's so good about them is like that song Us Versus Them.
Yeah.
Like they like sound like an oi band.
Yes.
It's a really good oi song. Like,
yeah.
Like,
and what's crazy is, like, when people don't understand, when I'm telling them songs like that, like Injustice System, and I'm telling people, like, hey, these are our reminders that no one is above the law. No one should ever be corrupt, or what we say in the streets, like heavy-handed, like, no. And this is the check. This is how you go, let me recalibrate. And I've said it before with Body Count's song Cop Killer back in, the 90s. And I've gotten into some arguments with some people, and I've told them, art reflects life. So when you hear a song like that, do you think whoever wrote it, whether it's Ice-T or someone else or whatever, or collaboration, whatever, whoever wrote it, I can almost guarantee you has been on the heavy end of
without a doubt.
an instrument. You know what I mean? I grew up seeing it. I've been searched when I was a teenager. I had no clue what was going on. I've been called, slurs by police officers when I was a teenager. But also that didn't stop me from doing what I wanted to do. But I tell people, music is powerful in that sense too. And if a band like Sick of It All can write songs, whether it's about world affairs, whether it's about growing up in New York, or whether it's about, corrupt sections of law enforcement, we need to pay attention. And it still resonates. It's kind of the sad thing, but also that's how powerful the music is. It doesn't get stale or have some commercial, manufactured sound. It's like, no, that's straight from the heart,
Yeah, I mean, you reference Body Count, Cop Killer, and I instantly think of NWA.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck the Police. And when I first heard that song, I didn't agree with the sentiment or the refrain.
Mm-hmm.
But as time's gone on, and I kind of have more of an open-minded, spacious ability to kind of see through multiple lenses and
Mm-hmm.
and try to be an active listener to other people's lived experiences.
Yeah.
That song was a wake-up call.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody that's followed music can deny the impact that song had. It made everybody have to look at, authoritarianism or,
Mm-hmm.
Elements of law enforcement coming in way too heavy and being way too aggressive.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, you've been involved in it. I've been involved in it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the type of occupation that is critical to the fabric of the idea of this country, but it does warrant the scrutiny and updated and modernized training that's required to be better active listeners and be more compassionate and hold more space and de-escalate. So I appreciate you kind of opening up those lenses, and you can support or believe in people who do the job, but hold them to a high level of accountability too, and then open up these lanes and these lenses to talk about it. So yeah, I thought that was really skillful how you did that.
Yeah. Because of the background, because of perspective growing up, I was like, man, I didn't like bullies. So I'm like, man, I couldn't take when somebody would get bullied. So a lot of times I would jump in. And it was just this idea of there's no way every cop is just walking around like a robot bashing heads. And then when I had negative experiences, it's like, okay, well, now I'm thinking that, but then having a positive experience and then growing up a little bit and then saying, in my head, just going, this is what I want to do. I'm not in a band. I'm not anything like that, but I'm going to do it my way. So all I've got to do is get on patrol. I've got to get kind of the being sworn in, and then I can do what I want to do. And so if I see corruption, I'm going to be like Serpico. I'm going to go after corrupt cops. I'm going to do this and that. And what was great is I didn't see that. I saw a lot of great cops that I worked with, and then some that needed an adjustment. They were, that not even aggressive, just rude almost or heartless. And I just couldn't wrap my brain around that. So I'm like, nah, I'm still going to do real work. I'm going to go after gang members. I'm going to get guns out of waistbands, but I don't have to do it in that way. I'm actually going to do it more to where once I get someone in that position, talk more about their life and how the hell they ended up in that situation, as opposed to high-fiving somebody and going, yeah, you're going to jail for a gun or for selling drugs or that sort of thing. And I used to tell rookies when I would train them in the field, your duty sometimes is to make an arrest, a physical arrest. You got to take someone to jail. But that doesn't mean you got to create an enemy. and that's
no,
get it
like
wrong. Yeah.
I love how you frame that up, because like I don't believe in siege mentality
Mm-mm.
relative to anything actually, and I think in Boston, I want to say in the '90s, there was a switch to community policing,
Mm-hmm.
and that from that period of time up until now has only increased. In something else that's been um, brought into kind of the first responder world over the last 10 years, I know in California and in Denver and various spots, is having like safe teams, um, like mental health crisis teams,
Mm-hmm.
work in conjunction with EMS and work in conjunction with fire and LEOs. So um, I'm a real big believer in that, in that added layer
Mm-hmm.
of response, because these teams are, are trained up to pretty high levels, um, as far as doing social work or clinical work or
Mm-hmm.
advocacy work, and in a lot of places it's been a benefit and helpful. So yeah, I thought, and then I think that's actually something that eventually will be implemented in Boston too.
Yeah, I hope so. I was fortunate. The department I worked on until I retired was very progressive to be in the South and very forward thinking. And so maybe 16, 17 years ago, something like that, I went through training. I was back on patrol then, but I went through training that was just like that, crisis intervention. It's basically like a CIT program. So then, and you spend 2 weeks going through with clinicians, touring the facilities in the cities that that you're going to be dropping people off, but also focusing on what it means to observe someone having a mental crisis and how do you intervene. Because years before that, like for my uncle, he was just constantly getting arrested. And he was Section 8 from the Army for schizophrenia. So here he is on the streets and he's running these cycles. And really back then it was just keep arresting. Hey, I got to get this dude off the street. And so when I went through that training, it was good to see, hey, this is like near and dear to my heart. Like there are going to be times when we have to fight. And I get that. But also if we see someone's having a crisis, now what are our avenues that we can do? And if we're having people, which you do in cities, you have repeat consumers. There's people that just they don't have a family or a network that's necessarily there for them. So you do have to spend a little more time with them. And if cities have these teams, it's almost the equivalent of like a gang unit. You go to the gang unit and they know all the gang members. It's like, okay, you go to the crisis team or whatever the city wants to call it. Hey, I've got this person on my beat or in my zone or area, and they're struggling, and it looks like they're showing signs of schizophrenia. What can we do to help? And you actually work as a team to make their life better. And I do tell people, it's like those are the things that through a career you'll remember, and it'll actually make your heart better. Like physically you won't be as angry, and emotionally, like as you mature in life and you get towards the end of your career. And this is for people listening who are just getting into the career of any kind of first responders. Like those moments when you help someone who is in a crisis, who you may talk out of harming their own family, themselves, or you just get them the resources they need. And it's so rewarding. And that's why I try to tell a lot of people, like, please don't turn your back on these professions. Like, people are stacking the deck against departments, or they may just be like, hey, you don't need to join, don't do that. And it's like, no, like, please join. Like, we need more people being EMS, being fire, being dispatchers, being police. Like get out there, do it, help. It feels good. And if you truly believe that an area is corrupt, be part of that change. Get on board, and then work towards changing that culture. I know I did, and I loved it. I mean, I love that when I retired, I was happy and proud. Hey, I just did over 2 decades, and I left my mark on my department and other departments just like that, like changing their perspective of just be kinder, nicer. You can always ratchet up. You can always train better with your firearms, your grappling, your techniques, your arrest techniques. That's cool. That's what you're supposed to do. But be kind to everybody until
Yeah,
a bad thing happens.
kindness and compassion are always wise response, and I think they work effectively in tandem with de-escalation or verbal judo, or just making people making people feel like heard and seen, and like meeting people where they're at. So yeah, like telling people to get involved in various ways if they want to be a first responder, police, fire, EMS, safe teams, whatever the case may be. It's noble work. This is a huge understatement. It's difficult work. But it's you do have those moments like you kind of like spoke to earlier, like you can see that you've like helped, and even if it's just helping 1 or 2 or 3, 4 people, like that's like doing the good in front of you and helping people and being there for them in the moment with presence, like being fully present for them. It means a lot.
Yeah. I appreciate your time, man. You actually answered the questions earlier that I always wrap up with, like recommendations for music. You said a few bands earlier.
Is Conservative Image, the Drowns. Definitely check out the Drowns out of Seattle. It's so good.
Our buddy Knocko is the one who first told me about Conservative Military Image. He's like, dude, like they're right up your alley. You gotta check them out. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your time, buddy. Is there any way if people want to reach out to you, if you're open to that, is there a way they can do that?
I think, as far as the band goes, with Street Dogs, we have our Instagram page, and like when we play the Middle East, August 29th, that's going to be a Thursday, and then when we play the Punk and Drum Book Festival, the 31st, August 31st on a Saturday, the band's approachable and accessible. We're not going to be hiding on a bus or hiding in a dressing room. Like, people can talk to us, and we're accessible. And I think I was in another interview recently, and I said, kindness isn't a strategy, or it's not a performative thing for us as people in this band. It's like a way of life, and it's appropriate under any and all conditions. So I think looking back in the past, like with band life, like there's times when I've been selfish and inconsiderate, and my feet weren't on the ground in the present moment, and I was always seeking what's the next. And today I don't live that way anymore.
Good deal.
I live to be kind and actively listen and try to be more compassionate, and we're super grateful to anyone who takes the time and comes and sees us. We're nothing without you.
Well, I'm just glad y'all are playing shows, man. And anyone in that area, go catch them. Check out any of their albums, Street Dogs. Reach out to me if you've got any questions or anything like that. I'll forward them over to Mike. And I appreciate your time, buddy.
All right, Brian. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Disruptors out.